So today we are taking this engine apart. Reason being, there's a lot of experimental in this engine. Dry sumped, weird clearances, custom head gasket, all that stuff. It's been 2 years since I put this together, and this is actually the same block. This car has always had the same one. Me and Nassim spray painted in here years ago. Still stock pistons, so there's a lot of weird stuff going on here, setups that no one else runs. And then we had a bunch of misfires and over revs and whatever this year. So I just want to play it safe and check everything. And actually, hopefully I find something. Hopefully I find some bearing wear or whatever, and I can address it before the next event. It all starts with cutting that oil filter open. I like to cut filters open after every event. They've been absolutely spotless this entire year, but now it's hard to see actually. There's really fine shavings in it. So I went through maybe like 5 oil filters or 6 this year and then cut everyone open. Not a spot of anything in there. You can kind of see little particles here in what oil spilt, but it looks like bearing, to be honest. This is for Motorsports and this is for TMP. So 2 events on this filter. And the one before had a few particles, but nothing to worry about. And now this one looks worse, and I have a feeling it has something to do with the flywheel coming loose and then shaking that crankshaft so much it probably ate up a main bearing. So might be that. But we'll figure it out. Now we know what kind of party we're walking into. Definitely some stuff in these scavenge filters. Oh yeah. Oh, that's silicone. But there's some metal too. No surprises here. If you have a surprise here, then something's gone horribly wrong. Third main cap is nice and tight. Usually this just falls off, usually. Because that one gets beat up the most. They were all tight, they all felt good coming off. None of the studs were loose. There were actually little marks from the dial bore gauge when I was actually measuring everything. And then I polished these with newspaper just to take off the little protective coating and everything. So this is kind of how it looked going in, except for some of these marks, but you can't even feel them. They're not anything. So they're not anything that would cause shavings in the oil either. The worst thing is that mark right there. And then you can't even feel that either. And that looks like it was from initial startup or something. Because if this cap was offset, you'd see some pretty heavy wear on both sides. So this might have been installing the crank or something, but you can't feel it. That's not even through the top layer. So that's great. These are the journals. They're all still polished. You can see the tear dropping for the mains there. I mean, yeah, this all looks good. I was honestly expecting to have to pull the crank out to deal with the main bearing, but the thing is, these bottom ones are loaded the most because it's supporting the crank. The crank is just sitting on it, and then when combustion happens, it's getting beaten down, so the crank's trying to fall out of the motor, not come up. Almost never, even on D-cell, there's not really much load going up. So these top mains, if the bottom ones look like that, then I know the top ones are good and the journals are fine, so there's no reason to disturb any of that. I'm gonna torque those right back on. I gotta look up my torque specs, to be honest. I don't need to measure any clearances because oil pressure is completely fine, so there was no drop in that, there's no anything, so that's good. That's some good peace of mind. Run these studs back in and torque it down, and then What I'll do is I'll pull the head off before I check the rods, because I just want to pull the whole piston out so I can check the rings and everything. And then I want to check the oil pump back here. This is inside my oil pan. Nothing too exciting here. Just a simple pan and then a little perforated sheet baffle. And then 3 scavenge pickups. This crossover tube fits right on in there, like factory, from the factory oil filter housing. So it's a nice deal. I'll replace these O-rings too, because you don't want one of those blowing out. Oh, some of you are definitely wondering too. You can't actually get bearings in the thickness that these actually are. These, I actually sat here for I think a week. I spent like 2 hours a day for a week or something plus, sanding the backs of these to get them about 1/1000th thinner than they were out of the box. So these are just standard size bearings, and I had to literally just take emery cloth to the back of them, and micrometer, and then emery cloth, and go forever, and then install them, and then bore gauge it, and make sure the thickness is good, and make sure they have enough crush. So these took a lot of time to set up. So that's what happened. So these clearances, I have them all on a sheet. I might pull it out later in the video. So, fun fact about these, actually, if you don't know anything about Saabs, these are actually CDI coils from factory. Like, they started with these in the flippin' 80s. CDI coils with ion detection, or ionization detection. So there's no cam sensor. This is your cam sensor. It actually sends a current through the plugs that detects whether it's on a compression stroke or whether a combustion actually happened. So you got knock detection, misfire detection per cylinder, with CDI coils from factory. And there's more too. That's honestly why Saabs are gone and out of business, because they spent so much money on stuff like this. Yes, these are stock cam gears. I was running no dowels for a long time, but a few months ago I decided to switch to dowels because I found that the intake cam was slipping ever so slightly. So yeah, it's been great. This is actually the lift in thousandths of an inch. So that's 58 thou, that's 69 thou of lift at TDC. So if you got these cams, you know what cams these are. H-Blum cams, I don't even think he makes them anymore. That's what you got to set them to for 8,000 RPM. Yeah, the pistons look pretty ugly, like they've been burning oil, because it actually does on cold starts. Because when the car sits with the dry sump, the whole crankcase fills up with oil. So the first startup is just a nice puff of smoke, because one of these cylinders gets filled with oil, or 2 of them. So everything looks good otherwise. These fire rings are stuck pretty good. There's one of them. So yeah, I did a really bad job with the silicone when I put the head on initially, and then it was leaking water literally out of here. And because it's vented, right? It's got these vents in the head gasket. I know this is a pretty trick head gasket design. It'll just leak out of there, so it doesn't really cause any damage. So all I did was torque the head some more. That's why it looks ugly, because this is exposed to the elements. Because this is like a vent out the side of the deck, so it just oxidizes. Yeah, so I just had to drill some holes in my beautiful crank pulley because I'm an idiot and I actually forgot to make a way for this to come off, because it's a very tight press fit onto the nose of the crank. So that's off anyway. I actually drilled it really nicely. And if you notice, there's no mandrel actually for the dry sump pulley. The way this works is this just presses on to the nose of the crank. There's about a 1/4 inch left, not where this mark is. There's a little bit left where this just presses on, like you heat it up and then a little bit of Loctite and press it on, and then tighten the bolt down and it doesn't slip, and it hasn't slipped in years. So that's great. I can only do that because this dry sump pump is just a scavenge pump. If this was a pressure pump, I couldn't risk doing that, because if that slips even a little, then that could just be disastrous. Because these scavenge pumps, people actually use serpentine belts on like LS motors or something when it's just scavenge. Because if the scavenge slips a little, it's fine because it's just scavenge, right? But that doesn't slip anyway, so that's how I can get away with that bit of engineering. This looks suspiciously good for how much shavings were in the filter. But that keyway looks a little wonky. Looks like a brand new engine. Again, no surprises here, just a Saab timing set. This is how I actually plug my balance shafts. That's an aluminum thing, and then this one's actually a set screw from up in the mains. So the oil doesn't even come back up from the main bearing, so this doesn't have to be plugged. I have no idea why this keyway is like this. You should never have to use a puller to get the dog drive and the balance shaft sprocket off, but we'll find out. Put a new keyway in. Funny enough, the act of pulling that stuff over the keyway actually straightened it, mostly, sorta. Yeah, the more I look at it, the more it seems that I might have damaged this just putting the crank pulley on years ago, because this keyway is so soft. Pulled everything over it and it straightened out that easily. So it's hard to imagine, because if it's twisted forward, that means the motor was trying to decelerate and the crank pulley was trying to keep on going with the alternator. That's the only thing on it. And it's not like I got like a twin disc clutch or anything, and it's not like there's like a power steering pump and water pump running off of that. So I don't think the crank pulley has enough momentum to move forward, and it doesn't have any marks of slippage, or that was pressed on real tight. I had to heat that up and pull it real hard for it to come off. So I probably damaged it, but luckily I got a spare full short block just chilling there. So I can take all that stuff, keyway, sprockets, everything. Nice low mileage motor. And then, oh yeah, look at that. So yeah, see that indentation? So this is my version of a rod bolt stretch gauge. Basically, you could buy these for a couple $100, or you could just make one if you can make things. So like everything else, I just made it. So the idea behind rod bolt stretch is I'm gonna measure these bolts as they are, and measure the length of the rod bolt as it is torqued, and then when I untorque it, it should unstretch by 5/1000s, because when I torqued them, they stretched by 5/1000s. So if they don't spring back all 5, then that means I need to replace one, because that means it has yielded. So I basically have this one zeroed out. Well, I did have it zeroed out. I'm holding the camera with one hand. So then what we're looking for is this to spring back to the 4. So you can see here that one basically sprung all the way back to the 4. So we're good. That one was stretched 5,000, it came back 5,000, so it'd be good. So it's not like I'm expecting these things to be all over the place, because I'm not making like 1,200 horsepower at like 11,000 RPM. I'm just checking for peace of mind. So none of these should be too far out of spec with the way I run things. So just took this cap off, and ouch. You can see how nice and shiny that is, so it's getting good oil pressure, but that's on the bottom side. And I can't even say I'm surprised, because this is from the weight of the piston and rod, trying to like make it to the moon every time you lift off throttle and there's vacuum. So lift off at like 8,000 RPM, I mean, not just regularly lift off the throttle. Oh yeah, number one's no good either. Again, this is the bottom side, so that's from D-cell. Yeah, look at that, damn, never seen that before. I've only seen like oil-starved bearings. Yeah, number 4 not looking so hot either. So number 2 and number 4 are kind of okay. Actually, the top of number 4 isn't looking so good either. Number 1, kind of meh. Come on, focus. Got a moment to process things here, so I just decided to pull the crank back out to look at those mains, and they do look fine. So just making sure the engine's not hiding any more secrets. So now we know where our shavings were coming from in the oil, and that's good because now I have a decent decent tracking of this, because it had no shavings up until the beginning of September, and then it had shavings. So that tells you something I did in that time caused it. Anyway, to cause this kind of wear, I still need to sleep on it. The crank itself is actually fine on all the rod journals. There's no marks, nothing. And I had this micro polished before putting it in. So the fact that it was micro polished made it so that it didn't really catch the bearing in a way, or the bearing didn't catch this. So you're not going to transfer much material, if at all, with a surface like that. So I guess the polish is to thank for that. It could be because there's not enough oil pressure getting to the rods because the mains are so loose, because these are all my clearances. This is how I do it when I build engines. Even my daily driver, when I swapped out pistons and rods and stuff, I like to map it all out like this. But my rod clearances were 27 thousandths all the way across vertically, 27, 27, 28, 28, and then around 30, 32 on side clearance. So that's like, it's pretty loose, which is a good thing in this case. But the mains were 34 vertically, 30 to 34, 35, and in the 40s lat sideways. So, but anyway, the mains are a lot looser than the rods, so what might be happening is we have enough oil pressure to see oil pressure on the gauge, but it's all leaking out past the mains, and only a small fraction that is actually making it to the rods. And the only solution to that is to really just ram more oil pressure through it to get it to the rods. Because I'm looking at this and it's like, well, if I tighten it up, it's going to flow less oil through the rod, so it might make it worse, and then there's less clearance and there's less margin for error. If I make it looser, then I'm going to have even less oil pressure overall, which isn't good. And if you didn't know, I get like 100 PSI oil pressure on the regulator that I have a special spring in there when it's cold. And then as the motor heats up, like oil temperatures get up, it'll drop to around maybe 30 PSI idle and then 80 PSI high RPM. But then when the coolant temperatures get up to around 100, and then oil temps are around 100 as well, then I get like 20 or 15 at idle, which is pretty low, but that's okay for these engines. And then up in the rev range, I get around 60. So like at 8,000 RPM, I get 60 pounds of oil pressure, which It sounds bad, but these are straight drilled cranks, straight shot oiling, which means the main is drilled to here. So basically when the crank spins, it pumps the oil with the rotation, just the way it's drilled. It's a Euro car thing, but either way, since it's straight shot oiled, you can have low oil pressure and have it still work decently. But now I'm thinking with the amount of power I'm running and the high RPM and everything and the weight of these pistons, it might just simply need more oil pressure to these rod bearings. So not such an open and closed case if you really want to dig into things and figure out what makes things work properly. But then again, these rod bearings have been in there for what, almost 2 years, and I've done so much with it. So there's that. So either way, I'm gonna end up putting a new set of bearings in it. Nothing too crazy. This crank, I might even just run some polish over it with the microfiber just cause, but they look completely fine. And then throw it back in. And then I'll deal with the oil pump situation and oil pressure situation, putting it back together. But I might go to a bigger pump, which is like the older style 900 pump. It's a much higher volume pump. But beyond that, I'm gonna check the engine out some more tomorrow after getting some sleep. The bores look good. There is one scratch in cylinder 1 that goes all the way up to the top, that you can feel with your fingernail. It's not gonna hurt anything short term, but long term that's not good. The cross hatching is still there. That scratch just might be from debris. You can actually see it here. Hold on, focus. There it is. That scratch. So it might just be from not running an air filter and just running a screen on the intake. That could just be a very tiny piece of sand or something. Yeah, the finger does catch it. But we're gonna run it. I have not torched a piston yet in a B204, and it would be an interesting thing to see. Not that I want to, but you know, my God, am I glad that I decided to take this engine apart. It might be a good thing to, when it's not broke, fix it, because in racing, you don't know until you dragged it all the way out to a track and fired it up and you're ready to go out in the track. And you're like, oh crap, it's knocking now, or oh crap, there's no oil pressure. So I am glad I checked it.